Hi, folks. I'm Steve. Thanks for checking out the session. I'm going to dive right in. This is a case that I worked through with a client last year, an extremely large telecom company here in North America. But I think it kind of exemplifies the early stages of what good looks like and some of the things to avoid. What works well, what I found really helpful, and things that you can implement in your environment, whether that's large or small scale or wherever you are in a platform journey. So let's dive right into it. What are we talking about? I'm going to set the stage a little bit, talk about a little bit of context, going to talk about the idea of crafting a pilot. So starting small with something that scales, that represents what we're looking for at a large scale, but without all the risk of a big bang. Nailing the basics before you scale it, you got to nail it. So, what does that look like? We're going to also talk about gotchas and tips, so things that might get in the way and how to avoid common challenges. And then I'm going to give you a couple resources for taking next steps on your own. So, a little bit of background. Um, I was working with an organization doing a large scale implementation last year. Um, they had kind of like an incubation area inside the organization, kind of like an innovation center, and lots of good practices kind of spread out across multiple teams, no real standardization, no common infrastructure, no platform to speak of. And they're starting to see the challenges, right? They're starting to see duplication of efforts, duplication of code, lots of confusion, lack of standards, low quality, lots of friction, lots of chaos, basically. And so before you kind of take this and consolidate it into a massive platform effort for the entire organization, you've kind of got to sort out the house at a small scale. You got to figure out, if we can't fix the innovation center, if we can't get them operating effectively, then how are we going to implement this at, a gigantic Fortune 500 company? This is kind of based on previous work too. Like very similar model. They wanted a platform that they could use internally, but ideally sell to their customers. Right? They see the Amazon model. They've seen the opportunity with having a very highly capable, high value platform that can not only improve operations internally, but then provide a service, a valuable service to customers and partners. So not only are we solving this problem internally, we have to productize, right? We've got to make this a valuable effort to external customers, which means a higher level of security, a higher level of capability, customer experience. But there's a lot of value there, right? If you can capture it. So I presented last year on Predix, GE Predix, which is kind of like served as an example of what not to do in this case. Right? We're using a lot of the things that we learned coming out of Predix, which was a very similar goal. Right? They wanted this platform they could use internally, but they could also sell outside the company. And so, learning from those mistakes, we set out to create this pilot success model that would scale to the large organization. Um, and we started working collaboratively, right? So, anyone who knows me knows I'm a huge fan of collaborative mapping. And that's the approach that we took here. We started bringing people in, collecting their perspectives, ideas, pains, challenges, mapping out a target outcome from different perspectives. What does this look like in terms of obstacles? What's between where we are and where we want to go? What does where we want to go look like, right? It turns out that there was different target outcomes depending on who you ask, right? Depending on the target customer. We have internal stakeholders, we have internal contributors who are going to be leveraging a platform. We have partners. We have domain experts and accountable parties like security teams and compliance teams. And we have regulators. So we did a lot of mapping. We did a lot of mapping on, who's the most important customer here? Who are the customers we don't want to forget about? And ultimately, um, what is the most important target outcome that we can focus on? Because you can't do 18 things at once. So we narrowed this down a little bit, and through mapping it out, we arrived at this target outcome of a self-service um, platform that would make it easy to do the right thing and hard to do the wrong thing, right? I mean, that's pretty high level. It's not specific, but it provides us guidance, right? We know that that means our customer, or at least this initial phase, is individual contributors, right? We understand that we have to make it seamless and easy for them to do the things that they need to do. That has like implications for onboarding, access, self-service, documentation, user experience. And then hard to fail, meaning that we have to provide guardrails to uh, enable things like security compliance, regulatory compliance, help people understand where they might be adding code that introduces risk or technical debt or complexity, right? So even though this is a very high level, somewhat nebulous target objective, we all can have a very good conversation about what it means. And that all got mapped out. We sort of exhaustively did this brain dump across everybody involved into a common place where everybody could look at it, agree, disagree, discuss, and align on what we're talking about and where we're headed, which is super valuable. So after that, what we did was we value stream mapped. So we mapped the current process that is involved in delivering code inside of our pilot team. So we mapped out all the activities in order, how long it took. We highlighted areas that were exceptionally, let's say, challenging or time consuming, and added it all up so we could understand how long does it take to do these things right now? What is the cost of those things? And we understood how much of that was wasted time, how much of that was getting in the way of doing the right thing and doing it efficiently and effectively. So we were able to highlight 2 hotspots there. That's valuable because it takes everything that you could be looking at and narrows it down to just what is the main friction points, the main pain points that we could be looking at. And from there, we could dig in and we could talk about things like different tools that are used across the entire workflow. If you're implementing a platform approach, you want to make sure that you are integrating and incorporating all the tools that are involved so that we don't have context switching, we don't have friction for, as a developer, moving through this workflow. So that brought us to the pilot, right? What are we going to do to address the target outcome, knowing the pain points that we've highlighted in the workflow? And we could have highlighted everything from security, quality. You can really map anything onto a value stream map that pertains to workflow. So where quality becomes challenging, where we're not meeting expectations or specifications. So the value stream map really gave us like a framework for understanding the workflow that needed to be addressed with a platform. And what it also allowed us to do was highlight where we saw challenging dependencies. So if we look at something like deployment, we can understand by digging into that where we have external dependencies that are currently served by shared services. So when we need to deploy under the current workflow, we've got to go talk to the data team, we've got to go talk to the DevOps team. They do things for us. It's why things are taking so long. And we could look at what are they doing? What are the things that they provide that we could hopefully address through either automation, less friction, maybe instead of asking through Slack, we can fill out a form that automatically populates a ticket or whatever. We can start to look at what are the friction points in the workflow. And when you talk about addressing friction points in the workflow, those teams, the shared services teams, are providing capabilities to us, right? So we can look at what are those capabilities and are we actually able to provide those either through automation or doing them within the team? How do we enable self-service, right? So we can look at these capabilities from a couple different dimensions. Who owns them, right? Do we understand who owns these capabilities? Does anyone own them currently? Is there a backup for that ownership? Is there somebody that we can go to? So inside of our team, if we're trying to take over something like data refresh, do we have anybody on the team who can actually do that? Or do we have to look at just making it easier to access that capability? So we can understand that better by evaluating the skill level in the team, the resources available. That could be anything from documentation to APIs or integrations. And then we can pull all this together into a score. So when we're talking about achieving our target outcome, these capabilities are really what is going to enable that at scale. And we can have really good conversations about where we see the most challenging aspects of addressing those capabilities. So another lens for this is you could take a value stream map and you can layer your dependencies and capabilities directly on top of the friction points, right? So we can understand, we can highlight where the hotspots are and where the dependencies relate to those hotspots and the capabilities that are related to those dependencies. So all this really just makes it easier to have really high value conversations and get on the same page about what are we going to do about this stuff. So that all funnels into, there's many maps that I'm not able to share in the time that we have, but we're able to understand all of this together and look at breaking it down into things like what are the standards that we want to incorporate into the platform? How are we going to prioritize our efforts? How are we going to actually make progress? There's a portion of this that's just dedicated to vocabulary. What do we mean when we say X, Y, Z? When we say platform, what are we talking about? That's all really important if you want to nail it before you scale it. So specifically about nailing it, the approach that we took was all about understanding the flow of work, right? So because primarily what we're trying to enable is making it easy to do the right thing. That's like focusing on workflow and a frictionless user experience for the individual contributors who have to be doing the work. And we focused on an internal development platform as a way of enabling that self-service. And we could broaden the scope of that by understanding, okay, well, where are we currently, right? So the ecosystem that we're operating under looks like this collection of product teams and platform teams that are entirely bottlenecked by shared services in the current state. So we understood where we were over relying on custom interactions with this team that's super overloaded. And we would have to break that pattern by introducing a platform that provided self-service. So we didn't have the bottleneck of shared services anymore. But we're able to map this out and then talk about it really productively by using this visual collaborative mapping. So how do you do this? How do you screw this up, right? So what does it look like to really not execute this well? And this idea of as a stadium on a desert island talks about a couple things for me. We're talking about not building something before we have an audience, before we have customers, right? So we want to understand from the people that we're building things for what they need. What are the issues that they have? Let's focus on the most painful, the most valuable, instead of everything that we could possibly target. And let's go and attack those things very specifically. What are the capabilities connected to those things? What are the dependencies that make those things challenging or unproductive? And then communicating effectively, right? So communicating with all the stakeholders who are either involved or affected or that we need to participate. It's all super important. So if you're interested in more about this approach, this idea of collaborative mapping that's specifically focused on workflow, I've got an ebook and an email course at this flow.visible.is. It's my website. If you're interested in hearing more about this, talking about this, if you've got a challenge that you'd love help with, I would love to talk to you. Thanks very much for checking out this session.